Sans tarder, je donne la parole à Khaled Al-Aboodi. La discussion aura lieu à la fin. Je pense qu'il vaut mieux qu'on ait l'ensemble des interventions et après on pourra avoir le discuter. Monsieur Khaled Al-Aboodi.
Yes.
Please. Good morning. The floor is yours. Yes. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My apology because I'm in an airport right now in the lounge, so if the quality of the voice is not good, just forgive me for that. Let me say in the beginning that I'm very happy to join you in this important webinar, and I really thank the organizer for inviting me. I'll be talking about mobilizing resources from private sector based on the experience that I have working with some multilateral development finance institutions. As you know, one of the major challenges that developing countries are facing is the lack of investment that is available to them to embark on path of real development. The importance of investment comes from the fact that there is a positive correlation between investment and the level of growth, and therefore there would be no serious growth without investment that drives it. Unfortunately, in many developing countries, the model of state taking the major role in driving the economy did not see much of success. Therefore, there is an increasing realization that the private sector should be the one who takes the role of driving the economy. But the issue for many countries is that the strength of the local private sector that has in most cases grown accustomed to rent-seeking practices, it then becomes apparent that the solution is to seek the involvement of the foreign private sector to attract them to come and invest. To that, there has been increasing competition to attract international private sector, and countries after countries offer generous packages to lure the private sector and convince them to come. The race sometimes goes unchecked to provide investors with more advantage than needed. However, let us assume that the government also gets smarter and offer to the foreign private sector the right incentive to come. What else the government can do beside that? What kind of business environment needs to be presented to private investor so that it will complement the investment incentive offered to them? Of course, the world is full of enough lessons of experience about various countries doing various initiatives and achieving different degrees of success. In general, we can say that countries who are more successful in attracting investment are the ones who are likely to demonstrate the readiness to show to the investor what the investor expects to see. For example, the protection investment codes and laws are more important to investors than the profit tax incentive. The clarity of laws and regulations are also important to ensure the impression of protection to investors. The track records of governments keeping their words is also essential to attract investors. Therefore, governments who have shown tendency to implement changes of rules at the middle of the road are less likely to attract more investment. Governments who are defaulted in their sovereign obligation are more likely to see less demand from investors for their future issuance of bonds of sukuk. Governments who have shown tendency to consult with its partners are more likely to succeed in keeping them interested and to share their understanding for a decision that may look unfavorable to investors. Many countries have created foreign investment council for consultation, and these councils or clubs prove to be useful in keeping investors committed to their investment. Now, who are the development partners that can help in countries' effort to attract local and foreign investment? At the top of the list, we can see the multilateral development finance institutions who have a mandate to develop the private sector in their member countries. Some of these institutions have a dedicated body to the private sector, like the IFC within the World Bank Group, the ICD within the Islamic Development Bank Group, the IIC within the Inter-American Development Bank. Some other multilateral development finance institutions support the private sector through departments, so from within the institutions, like the case of African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, and OFI. These institutions can invest and extend financing to private sector projects, and since they have articles of agreement that are signed by their member countries, they are protected from political risk and can therefore attract the interest of the private sector to work with them. They can also provide technical assistance and advisory work to help countries amend their laws and regulations in order to attract investors. They can help countries' effort to strengthen the local private sector to provide additional funding. There are, of course, bilateral development finance institutions which are also invest as private sector, like Proparco and CDC and DGE, for example. Some developing countries have attempted to create their own private sector arms who work as regional development finance institutions dedicated to private sector. One of the good examples to give here is the African Finance Corporation, established by Nigeria and proved to be useful in attracting private sector interest to invest with them. In general, working with the multilateral and bilateral development finance institution dedicated private sector may prove to be useful in attracting and mobilizing investment from both local and international sources. What else governments can do to attract investors and to increase the private sector participation in the economy? It goes without saying that the PPP's laws and framework prove to be useful in increasing the private sector participation in the economy, especially in the infrastructure sector, which require huge long-term investment. Nowadays, enough experience and knowledge exists there to draft and implement successful models of PPPs. The issuance of paper can also be useful to attract sources, but also requires strong framework and country rating. The issuance of sovereign sukuk, for example, will prove to be useful to attract resources from private sector. The experience of ICD in helping countries in West Africa to issue sukuk, which amount to $1.4 billion, was an important experience to diversify funding resources available to these countries and help even in lowering the prices of bonds that these countries were issuing. These resources collected from the issuance of these sukuk can be dedicated to infrastructure projects and also be structured as green sukuk, which can help attract investors who are looking for such instruments and to invest in. The importance of issuing sovereign sukuk goes beyond resources collected from the issuance. It can help to establish a benchmark for local corporate sector to issue corporate sukuk, offer to investors and to the public, which reduce the reliance on the backing lending. The privatization program in many countries helps to reduce the size of the public sector, but more importantly, it helps these public companies in the transition to be profitable again under the private ownership and thus be able to pay taxes. Therefore, privatization helps countries to get rid of failing companies that carry losses to profitable ones that pay taxes to governments. Two important lessons from successful privatization experience around the world are the right design of the privatization program and the successful building of the regulatory institutions that regulate the privatized sectors. Experience from specifically Latin America shows that failing to build the right regulatory bodies results in replacing public monopoly with private monopoly that continues to extract private gain at the expense of consumer and users of the service of these companies. Lastly, the development of non-banking financial services is also important not only to attract investment but also to channel local savings. Industries like mortgage finance, leasing companies, microfinance institutions, SMEs, funds, and institutions are all important vehicles for the development of the private sector. Hence, the Islamic solution of such vehicles exists, and entrepreneurs are more likely to demand the service of these countries, these institutions, than the conventional ones in Muslim countries. In conclusion, I think there are enough experience out there for countries to become aware of and design their program to attract and mobilize resources from private sector. careful design of such program and careful implementation of them will ensure success of government's effort in this respect. Let me, at conclusion, express my deep appreciation to the organizer for inviting me to this important subject of development. With that, I thank you so much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.